Hello, I'm Jennifer Thompson.
And I'm Chad Thompson.
And we are your hosts of The
Premise,
where we get to the story behind the storyteller. And this season 4, that's right, we're in season 4. We've got some amazing storytellers lined up, and we really appreciate you listening. Be sure to subscribe and rate us wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening. Let's roll.
Autobots, roll out!
Hello, and welcome to The Premise. I'm Jennifer Thompson, and I'm here with
Chad Thompson.
my fabulous producer and
No relation.
comic relief. Yeah, only my husband. Going on 24 years, folks. We managed to have a podcast and be married and work together, and it works.
Does it?
Today, I am super excited to have our guest, Jessie Leon. Jessie, welcome to The Premise.
Thank you so much for having me here today. It's
Oh,
awesome.
oh my gosh. I've been looking forward to this conversation. Your book is just absolutely, I don't think I have enough words to describe it. It is so vulnerable and so raw and so real and so important. The message is fantastic. And we're going to dive into that, folks. But first, let me tell you a little about Jessie Leon. Jessie Leon is the award-winning bilingual author of I'm Not Broken and No Estoy Roto. He's a TEDx speaker, that's TEDx San Diego, folks, motivational speaker, certified executive coach, consultant to philanthropy and social impact investors, and a Lambda Literary Award finalist. Jessie received his bachelor's degree from UC Berkeley and master's degree from Harvard University. And today we are here to talk about I'm Not Broken. Again, welcome.
Thank you for having me, especially being a San Diego born and raised individual in the unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation.
Woo woo! Nice, thank you. You know, when I was reading this book, and I know the city so well. I've been in San Diego. We were talking about this before the interview. Since 1989. I grew up in San Diego, really. I moved here when I was 18. And so San Diego's my home. You know, I may not have been born here, but, you know, this is where my heart is. And I knew all the corners and all of the places mentioned in the book. And it felt really, I don't know, like I was there with you. I could see the buildings and the streets, and it just made it that much more impactful, I think. This book must have been hard to write.
Extremely. Extremely hard to write.
For those of you listening, I just want to give you just a warning. There's going to be some triggers. We're going to talk about some things that are difficult. There was abuse, sexual abuse, and things that happened to Jessie when he was a child that it's hard to believe anyone could walk away from and then become, you know, a Harvard graduate and turn your life to helping the planet, you know, for social justice and mental health and, you know, all the things that you do to give back is just incredible. And you're just an incredible human being, Jessie. I'm sure you probably hear this a lot, but, you know, for our listeners, if that's too hard, I get it. This book is fantastic. It's amazing. It's important, but it's deep. You go there, you bring us to the moment when you are, as an 11-year-old child, essentially sex trafficked. Not essentially, literally. And I wondered as I was reading, you know, the beginning is brilliant because you take us to a place where your mom is sad because you got accepted to this faraway college called Harvard. She's so upset, right? That her baby's leaving, and she works in a school and the teachers are like, wait a minute, where did he get accepted to? And then she realizes, like, this is a big deal. Like, this is important. So we start knowing you're going to be okay. And that's important for the book. It's important for the reader. Talk to us about the process of laying the words down on the page and that beginning. Was that always the beginning? Did you edit that in? Like, tell us about your process.
Great catch. And thank you for taking the time to read the book. And I knew when I started writing my memoir, I'm Not Broken, that I wanted to start it and end it at Harvard graduation.
Smart. Yeah.
I knew that the journey of taking the reader through my journey was going to be a ride,
Yeah.
and a ride that was going to bring up lots of emotions, not just in me, but in my readers. And I wanted to start off with a very powerful scene, which is Chicano from the barrio graduating from Harvard University and what it took to get there,
Mm-hmm.
and the image that it brings up, right? And so I knew that that's what I wanted. I wanted to start it and end it at Harvard graduation. Sadly, was I wasn't able to talk about what came after, right? So I'm hoping that that would be a book too. What happened
Yeah.
after Harvard,
Mm-hmm.
and the professional journey and the ups and downs. But yeah, I knew that was um, what I wanted. That was a vision that came to me, and yeah.
It's really important because it'd be tough to read this book if we don't know you're going to be okay. I mean, you know the person's going to be okay because they're writing the story, but to know that you made it to a place that is really revered in this country, and I think for the reader, it keeps you going. Like, how does he get out of this and get to that? Like you can't stop turning the page. And in the beginning, I'll be honest, it was hard. It was hard to read those things that were happening. And like, you also did this thing, and I don't know if you did this, but in the beginning, the writing is a little more raw and almost a little more juvenile. It feels like it's coming from the perspective of that child.
Yes, I really tried to work with little Jesse
Mm,
and give voice to little Jesse, and which was painful,
yeah.
cathartic, healing at the same time. Especially reading the audiobook was very healing for me. But when listeners read, when people listen to the audiobook and they're capturing the emotion, and I lost it a
Mm,
number of times reading both English and Spanish. And um, but I want to go back to what you said, and I get this a lot. And so in interviews where people say it was hard to read, and I
yeah.
ask, what made it hard to read?
Are you asking me now?
Because let me follow it up with, because as someone that's had to deal with issues of self-esteem, issues of feeling less than, not good enough, sometimes when I hear in interviews someone say, "Oh, it was hard to read," my brain immediately takes it to the academic aspects of it lacked character development, it lacked structure,
Right.
it bored
Yeah.
me, it dragged on. And I think what people say was, it brought up a lot of emotions for me that I
Mm-hmm.
either had to put it down and step away. So
Mm-hmm.
then I challenge my interviewers to think about, are you saying that it was gut wrenching? It was heart wrenching, and it took me on a journey of emotions. 'Cause my head
Mm.
immediately takes me to a negative place
Yeah.
of criticism, right? As opposed to diving deeper to the emotional aspects of the reader.
You know, I'm going to answer your question, but that was one of my questions is, do you still find yourself criticizing and judging? Because you judge others coming from a place of, judging yourself in this book a lot. You assume that they're thinking the worst of you. And this is an example of that. But you're right. I need to be more specific in the way I say it. No, it wasn't hard to read because it's a bad book or it was poorly written. It was emotionally hard to read because I wanted to save Jesse. And this little boy, this 11-year-old, your mom doesn't speak English. So she doesn't have agency in a lot of ways. She doesn't have help. Your father is older and abusive and useless in a lot of ways. And yet you still respect him and look up to him and want his approval, which we all do. I mean, my father was incredibly abusive, and all I wanted to do was make him proud, right? That's just who we are. And so I just saw this little boy who, when these things are happening to him, I can't save him. And it's so difficult to read emotionally because I just can't imagine being in that position and knowing you made it through that. You know, it's just to think that humans are so awful to other humans is what I was talking to a client yesterday who is from Uzbekistan, and his life was incredibly difficult. His entire family, except for his grandmother, were shot to death in 2 days in Kiev.
Wow.
And he managed to escape to Israel, where he ate bread and sour cream and an onion every day for more than a year, because that's all he could afford to eat. And I'm like, what is wrong with humans? Like, I don't have hatred in me, and I can't imagine treating other humans like that and not loving people. And yet, Jesse, I've met you a couple times in person, and you have the biggest smile and the biggest hug for others around you, and people you've never met. You just hug them and you love them, and you put off this. And I don't know if you've had to work on this, as this is who you always were. So reading this book was very interesting to me, because the person I met, you know, and the person who you tried to be in this book, your armor, as you call it in the book, to protect yourself, you know, you've taken off that armor and you have nothing but love for people. And like, you answer everyone's questions, and you are just so willing to like be open and vulnerable and helpful. And I just find it extraordinary.
I'm smiling from ear to ear. Thank you. And that was a major part of my journey, was to allow others in, allow others to love me.
Yeah.
Loving myself was, and sometimes is, you know, part of the journey. If you looked at my bathroom mirror, there's Post-its all over it of positive affirmations that I tell myself every morning. I bought a t-shirt. I made a t-shirt with the image of 10-year-old nerdy little Jesse with the words "worthy" on top of it. And I try to wear it when I go speak to remind myself that I am worthy. I do belong here, and allow others not just to love me, but, you know, to be open to others' journeys as well. You know, I wrote my book to inspire others that are struggling with identity, addiction, suicidal thoughts, that we're not alone. And that in spite of our painful realities, that we can accomplish anything and thrive. That so that our youth don't kill themselves.
Yeah.
And our families see that in spite of the horrors of addiction and the painful circumstances we experience, that we too can accomplish anything.
You mentioned in the book something that really resonates with me, this idea of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. I mean, that's what America is built on, which is a bunch of bullshit. You can't pull yourself up by bootstraps. That's ridiculous. You know, like gravity isn't going to allow that to begin with. But you mentioned, like, you know, people say that to you often, like, oh, you pulled yourself up by your bootstraps. And you're like, no, I didn't. I had a network. I had people who loved me and helped me. Talk to us more about this construct of bootstraps and like what you think of that.
It was an entire community of people, and sometimes individuals, at times that I couldn't even see it, that were rallying behind me, trying to point me in the right direction. It's what I call these moments of magic, where, you know, my mom's, my moments of magic, where looking back, I can see that the love and support of people that just wanted to help me, but didn't know how. And I didn't make it to Harvard or UC Berkeley or community college, or, you know, getting clean and sober on my own. it was community, and to this day, it's still community. It's those around me that I call when I'm feeling down, um, that pull me out of it sometimes. And so there were no bootstraps. You don't even know where to buy the boots, you know?
Yeah,
And
you don't
so
even have boots, let
you don't
alone
even have
bootstraps.
boots. And so
Yeah.
when I hear that, it's a very much an individualistic ideology, and I don't come from that. I come
Mm-hmm.
from a family where the family unit is really strong. The intergenerational aspects of our family, especially in indigenous cultures, it's the family and the family dynamic. And so um it's about us, it's about we. And
Mm-hmm.
so I can't afford to start thinking that I did this. This is all me. Um because then I'm an ego. And as soon as I start thinking that it's all me, I did it, I got this, I run the risk of even relapsing and thinking that, well, maybe I can go have another drink. I'm doing this. I don't need anybody else. I can go do another line of coke, and that's not my reality.
Yeah. And there's so many people out there who have that same reality. And the there's this there's this line in the book where in the beginning I felt like every adult and every person of power in a position of power let you down 100%, from the school counselors to the person who was paid to be your therapist did not do anything to actually help you. It was absolutely appalling to me to see the system be so broken. And whether that was a result of racism, they didn't feel like you were good enough because you were brown. I don't know, because your mom didn't speak English. The teachers, no one, the cops, like everyone you dealt with. Although I guess there were 2 cops who did seem to have some softness toward you. But then you crossed this line and you entered, recovery. And all of a sudden there were all these people who like wanted to hug you and saw you who you were. And like this, like, what was it, you who changed and allowed them to help you? Or was it truly the demarcation of that moment?
I think it was multiple factors. You're right about being a child and the system, in essence, failing. I My journey should not have required me as a child transitioning to adulthood to navigate the mental health system alone
Mm-hmm.
and facing so many cultural barriers.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I wanted to like strangle that woman for not allowing your mom to be part of your process, to not allowing your mother to even be in the room or speak to her. I mean, it was just, I want to find her and take her license away.
it, it was horrible because back then there were different terms used, and I guess in terms of social work, I would have been considered a rescue back then.
Mhm.
And the reality was I was handed off. There was no follow through. There was no one from the state called to check up on me or my family to say, are you getting the adequate treatment? Hey, how's it going with your therapist? Did you know you can change therapists if the one that's been
Mhm.
assigned to you isn't meeting your needs?
Yeah.
There should be a mechanism in place to follow up with clients, with individuals, with survivors to ensure that they're receiving quality access to mental health. And if not, redirect those individuals to the appropriate gender affirming, multilingual, culturally
Mhm.
competent
Mhm.
care.
Right.
Um, and so there was no follow up, there was no oversight, there was no accountability. And I think that is what's needed, especially for survivors and our families, where when our families are a part of that process of healing. And so it when I look back, how is it that as a 14-year-old kid, once my perpetrator disappeared and I'm assigned this therapist by the state, and how do you go from being a 14-year-old kid, 18 years old? She knew about the drug use. I turned to street prostitution.
She knew about that.
That's even a bad choice of words. I was a sexually exploited child in the commercial sex industry of the streets of San Diego.
Yeah.
From 14 to 18.
Yeah.
And what they call survival sex to support my drug habit.
Mm-hmm.
All the while going to therapy. How can you live with yourself as a therapist knowing that you see this child and you never doing what he's doing and you never once recommend drug and alcohol treatment?
Yeah.
I didn't know about the McAllister Institute until I got clean. I didn't know about Phoenix House until I got clean. I didn't know that I could even change therapists until I got clean. And other people in recovery told me. And I learned, and there was a lot of anger, and there was a lot of resentment, and there was a lot of healing that had to be done around that. And a lot of resentment of, wow, had I come from a family that was not poor, that were not immigrants, would the adequate resources been recommended to me as they are for so many other families?
Right.
And even getting clean young at 18 years old, there weren't many young people of color knocking down the doors of recovery.
Yeah.
You didn't see that like we do today.
Well, and culturally too. I mean, Mexican culture is like, you don't talk about those things, right? Like you handle it in the family. So am I right about that?
To some extent. Part of the reason in writing my book and part of the reason I'm telling my story is to destigmatize reaching out to mental health providers.
Yeah.
To destigmatize addicts.
Yeah.
That hope is possible, that change is possible.
Yeah.
And so in a lot of ways, yes, I have to agree with you that a lot of these topics are just not discussed in our communities.
You do a really good job of not showing your resentment. Like I'm resentful for you, but you never blamed others really. I mean, you show us what happened, so we know what happened. We know that they failed you. But you never tell the story in such a way that it feels like you're like, well, if it's because of this and these people. Like you take ownership of the choices you made, regardless of the fact that you had no choice when you were 11. And these things happened to you. I wanted to ask how the editing process part of that? Were you cognizant of the fact that, when you finally got down and be like, this is going to be a book? Because my assumption, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you journaled first, then decided to write a book? Okay, I have so many questions. Let's start over. When did you decide this was going to be a book? Like really decided, I'm going to tell my story.
So I wrote the book not thinking I would ever publish it. I had a family member that was struggling. I saw the signs of anorexia, and I wanted to have a conversation with this family member and share my story because for a long time I suffered with bulimia. It was edited out of the book. I was bulimic for a long time because being a survivor of sex trafficking and childhood sexual abuse, my validation came from my body and what you thought of me. And if anything, that was the only thing I was good for was sex and the use of my body. And so it was how I maintained going to the gym and binging and purging and that was never talked about from a male perspective.
Sure.
And so I wanted to share my story with this family member, and I was told that I couldn't. That I couldn't. I wasn't allowed to disclose my story to this person in the family, and I said, okay, well, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to put it on paper. And as a matter of fact, I'm not only going to put my story on paper, but I'm going to go back 3 generations on both sides of the family, and I'm going to lift up the stories of the women in the family to
Mm.
demonstrate the resilience and the power of women
Wow.
keeping their families together and their journeys into this country, so that should anyone of a future generation in my family go through challenges where they want to give up, where they feel less than, where they feel that they just can't make it one more day, that they have a documented story of family, of resilience, um, to show that we can go from surviving to thriving.
Holy shit.
And
That's
so,
amazing.
and so 700 pages into it, single spaced, I then thought, oh wow, I have I have 700 pages of blah, of emotions on paper. And so then I started editing. And you know, I'm in recovery. I just celebrated 30 years, and I'm a public speaker. I speak at, you know, conventions and all over the world. And so I would have people come up to me crying after I'd speak. They'd hug me and they'd say, "You should write a book." And I think, well, I already have these 700 pages. So I said, well, maybe I should start looking for an agent. Maybe I should find out how to go from, you know, what I've written to publishing it. And that was an entire journey in and of itself. The book publishing process, which we could talk about later if you want.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, a lot of our listeners are writers. And so that's going to be an interesting piece. And that was totally one of my questions as we hear about your father's family and your mother's family, and they're so tragic. And the women, you know, there's definitely this like, this power, this resilience. And there's something you say that at the end of your book that, you know, the grass seems greener elsewhere on the other side of the fence, as I grew up hearing it. And you're like, no, the grass is greener where you tend it. And I just stopped for a moment and I was like, yeah, that is so good.
Thank you. Thank you.
So yeah, that's how the stories come to be about you ancestors and, you know, where you come from. And you know, very cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I love how at first I was like, oh, interesting. Here's an interesting tidbit. You know, part 1, we hear about your father. Part 2, we hear more about your father. And then part 3, I believe we start hearing about your mother and your grandmother in particular. So those moments with, you know, hearing the family stories, you mentioned like your father talked about these stories, but sort of in loose terms. Like, tell us more about, you know, learning about the family history as a child and how that impacted you.
Storytelling is just so important in communities of color, and in particular indigenous communities. For a long time, you know, my grandma did not write. My grandma didn't read. She was illiterate. My mom's mom. And she was full-blooded Huichol, or half Huichol, half Cora, so full-blooded indigenous. And so a lot of my journey, a lot of growing up is you hear these family stories, and it's just part of growing up. And you would hear stories when I'm helping my mom in the kitchen, and the cousins are over it, and the storytelling that happens. So there's an author that says it's all in the beans. And so when you're sitting at the table separating the good beans from the bad beans, los frijoles, and taking out rocks and from the bags of beans that you buy at the store, and you got to make sure they're clean. And as you're separating that, you hear the conversations as a kid, and they just would fill me with joy. And so before my dad died, I would ask him questions and stories of the family, and sadly he died with Alzheimer's. And so a lot of his stories, you know, prior to him dying, he would speak in Yaqui. the Yaqui Nation, and he would speak in Yaqui, and I'd ask other family members. It was kind of, what can I say this? It was affirmation to some of the stories that I would hear about his childhood when he was kidnapped by by the Yaqui Nation, um, in one of the battles that happened in that generation of, and when they got to the border area of Mexicali. But it was just powerful and empowering, and I knew that I wanted to document some of those stories because there are also so many other readers, Latino readers in particular, have sent me messages on Instagram, on social media, via email saying, thank you for including the stories of family.
Yeah.
It reminded me of my family.
Mm.
It reminded me of sitting with my abuelita
Hmm.
and having my abuelita tell stories of growing up in old Mexico.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah, storytelling is so important. It gives us place too. And these stories, well, I'm curious. I wanted to ask you, did you record your father? Did you get his voice on tape?
I did. I recorded his voice on tape. I have some videos of my conversations with my dad, and that's just, what's the word that they say in American Express commercials? That's
Priceless?
priceless. Oh my
I can't believe you would tarnish such a beautiful thing with
American Express.
American Express.
Of all
with commerce.
We can edit that out. No, it's funny, right? But it's priceless, because I also know that, my grandnephews, my grandnieces are not gonna know. And so I wanted to capture all of that. What I want to do is I want to digitize a lot of those conversations that were on tape, and figure out a way to make those into digital files so that future generations can actually hear the stories from both my mom and my dad's,
Wonderful. Yeah.
in their voice.
Great idea. Did the family member who needed this story, did she get it or he get it? Did they get it?
Oh my
Yeah.
God. Yeah. She got it. She's good. Oh my God. Yes. Pre-med, San Diego State. Anyways, I won't say anymore. No. She's a queen in her own right and is going to change the world in her own way. And it's beautiful to see this person blossom to the powerful woman she has become and find her own power from within. That is, oh my God. Yeah.
Nice. I want to talk about hope and faith. They both appear in your book. And it occurred to me that those are probably not their real names.
No, I changed everybody's names for protection.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people don't understand what I mean when I say protection. But
Oh.
when you're raised in certain communities,
Mm-hmm.
other authors in the previous version, through the editing process, I had everyone's real name. And I had other authors reach out to me and say, you may want to change the names because you're gay. And sadly, it'll be dangerous for you.
Yeah.
You need to
I can see
protect.
that.
You need to protect others.
Absolutely.
So I did. But yeah, that wasn't their name. And I try to capture themes of names: hope, faith, joy,
Mm-hmm.
even Nia and Maya. Their names, mean something different in other languages, similar to hope and faith.
When I met Faith, I was like, oh, right at the right time too. I was like, that's super cool.
She's still in my life. We talk every day. Yeah, and Joy. Wow. Joy was my second mom.
Mm.
Joy was my second mom, and may she rest in peace. She changed the lives of so many students in San Diego at San Diego High, and she believed in me.
Mhm.
And she never blamed my mom.
Yeah.
And that was the most beautiful relationship, to see a white woman who on her exterior looks, very manicured, always had her nails done, her hair perfectly done, nice makeup, very manicured, right? And didn't speak Spanish, never once blamed my mom. And the two of them together, I gotta say, were, when I was down and out, really supported each other and did their best to love me and find me the resources that I needed.
Yeah.
Joy was my second mom.
Mhm.
It changed my life.
Nice. Yeah, you had so many people, and they weren't always women, but people who just came out and showed you this love despite the fact that you weren't ready for it. Little Jessie and teen Jessie didn't want to accept that, didn't want to see that. But every once in a while people would break through. And it's beautiful.
Everyone,
Yeah.
you're so right.
And there's this thing that you said a couple times, like, oh my God, this person sees me. Like, that must have made you feel very vulnerable, but also hopeful.
Hopeful, but also vulnerable.
Yeah.
And sometimes you rebel against it.
Right.
That's why
It's easier, right?
It's easier to want to push people away, and because also when you deal with issues of abandonment, and you don't trust others, it's easier to want to keep people away. And so Z, one of the characters in the book, he's now a teacher in LA, and we connected. I hadn't seen him, oh my gosh, since high school graduation, I think. And he showed up at a book signing that I did in LA at Skylight Books.
Awesome.
And I saw him in the audience mid question.
Mm.
And I stopped.
Nice.
And I ran to him and I just wrapped him in my arms and we cried. And I was able to say, thank you for believing in me.
Oh.
As a recruiter, to try to get students to consider Latino students to consider going to college. So for those listeners that sometimes feel that you're not having an impact and you're not creating the change that you'd like to see, you're planting the seeds and you never know how those seeds are going to blossom. And I'm actually going to go in May to speak to his high school class. And I'm going to read the parts of the book about Z and how important he was for me as one of the first Latino men who believed in me and told me that he saw me. Because a lot of times I just wanted to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
For me, without any type of transactional relationship, that you genuinely care and don't want anything from me.
Yeah. And it was really helpful for you at key points to see people who looked like you.
My gosh, definitely.
In fact, Z was one of those people, and the security, I think it was at Roosevelt, the security officer who was also Latino, who was like, what's going on? He was like the first person to ask, what's happening? Something's not right.
Even though the police officer I did disclose, and I can look at the positive as opposed to the negative. Because for a long time, I was also angry with him, with the police officer. I felt that he also was part of the problem for dropping me off at home, not staying with me to help disclose to my mom that I'm being sexually abused. And had he been there, I would have been able to tell my mom about the sex trafficking. I never disclosed that to my mom. And that was hard because no one was there. How can you leave a 14-year-old child with no mental health professional, no social worker? The police officer left and dropped me off. How do you leave a child alone to tell a parent in broken Spanish that I'm being molested?
Yeah, that's
it's and in Spanish we don't have a word for molest.
Right.
Molest means to bother.
Mm-hmm.
Molestar means bothering, and I'm trying to tell my mom. And so for a long time, I blamed him as part of the problem as well. And so I'm learning how to give grace, and I've had to learn how to give grace and understand. I'm trying to live a life. I've tried to live a life of assuming positive intention always, and that if people knew how to help, they would have.
Well, and that's a problem in our country. Mental health is not addressed. It's very difficult to get help unless you have money, unless you have privilege. And even then, it's hard to get help. And I hope things are changing. I really, really do. But I don't feel very positive about it. I feel more resentment toward our system, toward, whether it's religious or political or whatever it is. We need more help for our youth. And especially now with, after the shutdown, kids are in trouble. They're worried about the planet. They're worried about COVID. There's so many things that kids are facing these days that are bleak.
I couldn't agree with you more. And one of my dreams is to build on my public speaking platform to speak with mental health professionals, social workers, to speak at conferences on this exact topic. And
I want to help you do that. That's
my God,
fucking awesome.
Thank you.
I'm so needed.
One of the first times I spoke at USC to the master's program students in social work. And USC has one of the first bilingual programs in social work. And I had some students, they were crying in the audience, and then they would come up to me afterward. No, actually, somebody asked a question about just how hard it was to hear my story. Once again, right, that being hard to listen, or what made it hard. And one of the things I threw back at the group was, you're going into this field. You're going to come across these issues, not from a perspective of someone that lived through it, but someone that's going through it. And there's a strong need, a gap that needs to be filled on how do you approach a situation from a culturally humble lens, gender affirming lens, and honoring the multilingual aspects that a lot of people in our community need from a therapist, from someone in the mental health field, because it's expensive. I had someone text me this morning and said, "Oh my God, I love your audiobook. It's so different than reading it. And I've done internal family systems, IFS. I've done EMDR." And my response was, yeah, that's amazing. EMDR, brain spotting, parts work, IFS, talk therapy, they've all helped me in my journey, but it's expensive.
Yeah.
Kaiser is horrible when it comes to access to mental health. It takes a month to find an appointment.
Yeah.
It takes another month and a half to be able to reschedule a follow-up appointment. If you need CBT or, cognitive behavioral therapy or DBT or any type of modality that you're seeking, they oftentimes don't have individuals in-house with those types of training and those modalities. So you have to seek it elsewhere. And now you're talking $300 an hour.
Right.
So for those of us that are experiencing trauma, not even at the levels that I've gone through, but say someone that just wants to explore a different type of modality to have a trauma-informed modality available to them, it's expensive.
Yeah.
And we need to work on that as a society.
Absolutely. Yeah. Healthcare, mental health care, I mean, it's lacking. It's definitely an issue. I want to take us to a moment when you first start going to city and all of a sudden you're learning things and it's really exciting, but you're also learning about systemic racism and things that are put into place to hold people down. Specifically, you talk about certain bills that are passed. We talk about the suburbs. And there's one thing, I speak a little Spanish. I'm just going to say not well. I'm not even going to embarrass anyone. But one thing I've always said is mande, right? Because that's what I learned, because I learned how to speak Spanish with people from Tijuana. And when you said that Mándame usted means order me, I was blown away. I was like, oh my God, wow. And I just that one moment that I got to experience you learning about the world and how it works was pretty awesome. And I appreciate you bringing us there. And I just want you to talk a little bit about how your brain was changing at that time when you started seeing the world around you.
First, I want to say that especially those of us that are in recovery or those of us that are struggling with issues of addiction, depression, when given the opportunity to refocus all that energy, the stuff we have to go through and the stuff we have to do to support our habits, we're extremely intelligent individuals. And for me, that's why I love public speaking and motivating others to uh, to move from surviving to thriving, right?
Right.
That
Right.
um, and I inspire others to stay in school. It took me 4 years to get my associate's degree, and one of those was beauty school, cosmetology school at San Diego City College.
Yeah.
And so, I'm speaking on Thursday tomorrow at Long Beach City College. I'd love to speak at San Diego City College. It hasn't been made possible. I've reached out to the administration there. I mean, I went there for 4 years. My dream is to inspire others, especially in community college, to keep going, to not give up.
Yeah.
Because what happened for me was as soon as little nerdy Jesse came back to life. And
Right. Yeah.
I would ask questions, psychology of gender, psychology of space. Why do men take up so much space compared to women, right? You want to sit with
Yeah.
your legs open. And in a movie theater, you always have if you're going with your buddy to the movies, you have to leave a seat in between the both of you so y'all can spread out. And oh my gosh. And so my learning was taken just to a whole other level. But because I had instructors, I had professors that knew how to engage the students in community college that sadly I didn't get in high school.
Yeah. Yeah.
That took the time to engage us. Jesse, what do you think about this? And it changed my life forever.
Yeah, indeed it did.
Curious inquiry and learning how to ask questions, research papers, going to the library and finding books and writing papers on various topics like the pathologization of homosexuality and hit throughout history.
Yeah.
And yeah, I went there. It just it was amazing. Reading books like James Baldwin, Maya Angelou, Victor Villaseñor, um, The House on Mango Street, just reading all these different books that just inspired me to believe that maybe one day I could do it too. Oh my God, I'm going to cry.
Stories
Because
matter, right? They
stories
matter.
matter, because had you told me back then, when I'm 18 years old, 135 pounds, kicking crystal meth and heroin, having lived the life of the childhood that I did, that I would one day graduate from San Diego City College. That
Right.
seemed so far-fetched.
Yeah.
I went to beauty school, to cosmetology school, because I was afraid I'd have to drop out, that maybe I couldn't make it, that maybe I couldn't graduate. So I had to learn a skill to hold me through.
Right.
And so, which was a blessing in and of itself that San Diego City College even offered that. But my community college counselors The EOPS office motivated me to stay in school. And then full ride to Berkeley,
Right.
living in Spain, living in Cuba, and then graduating and then getting pretty much a full ride to Harvard.
Yeah.
The world opened up,
Mm.
and it can open up for others too. I'm not unique. I'm not different. I just did the next indicated thing and followed direction. And I always shoot for the moon. You shoot for the moon, and what's the worst thing that can happen? I'll land on a star.
Right.
It's a
Yeah.
lot
Yeah.
better than what I've had in the past. So just trying to live my best life.
Tend your grass and shoot for the stars.
Yes, queen, yes.
You know that stars are balls
Okay,
of fire,
fine.
right?
Chad.
You're hilarious. You're hilarious, Chad. Love it.
But
Millions of degrees, man.
That's what we need. We need to be on fire for life, right? And this book does that. Jesse, you've lit a fire, and I just thank you so much for writing this book, for having I don't know, maybe people don't like to hear this, but having the courage to write it. Like, to me, telling your story so openly and so honestly, like, it must have taken some courage.
It did. And thank you for saying that. It does not bother me when people say that at all, because it does take courage. And that courage, other people help me find. Yes, courage comes from within. Other people just being alongside me on my journey.
Yeah.
And when they listen to this, they know who they are.
Yep.
I couldn't have done it without them.
Yeah.
And I do it to inspire others. We all have a story within. Right. Tell your story. You never know how it's going to impact someone else.
Just start writing.
Just start writing. Some of the wisest words I heard by an author named Malin Alegría. And I was struggling with, how do I get started? I tried Post-its. I tried outlines. I would reach out to other authors, and I'd get angry that very few reached back out to give me guidance on how to start writing. And then one day, Malina Alegría, author of a book called Quinceañera, she said, you know what, Jesse, you need to quit asking so many people like how to start writing, and just start writing. You'll know when you're done.
Yeah.
And
it's so true, right?
Right. Yeah. I knew when I was done.
Nice. Well, you're not done. You've got more books to write, a lot of stories to tell, and a lot of hearts to touch. I feel grateful for you. And thank you. Yeah. Sorry, I'm a little emotional just because I have people in my family who need your story, and I know people who need your story, and it's hard to accept that there is hope and you can have faith. But when you hear that someone else did it, it changes things.
Thank you. I had a friend, someone I met recently through a professional Latino networking event. And it's always funny when people ask you, so what do you do? And I can go down the path of,
right.
I manage impact investments and philanthropic grant making for foundations, family offices, and high net worth individuals. And I can keep it there. As soon as I say, I'm an author and a public speaker and an executive coach.
Nice.
Oh, you wrote a book. What's your book about? Oh, wow. It's a book of hope. It's a book of strength. It's a book of resilience to inspire others to not give up.
Nice.
Yeah. But what's it about? It's about going from the hood to Harvard. Oh, wow. Well, what made your book so special compared to another Harvard student? And then I'm like, oh God, here we go. And you don't want to be the buzzkill at at a social gathering, right? A networking event. And then you say, well, it's my journey of being sex trafficked, drugged, and the life I lived of being a sexually exploited child on the streets from 14 to 18, and my journey of finding hope and changing my life and others changing my life and my journey to graduating from Harvard. And then it changes.
Yeah.
So I had this one person call me. Actually, he wrote me a long email to say, we come from very different backgrounds, but I'm also Latino. I love the stories of family and how you brought that into your book. But your book got me thinking so much. I got home, I hugged my wife, I hugged my teenage sons, and I just cried with them. And I told them thank you. And
Nice.
you shifted my perspective
Hmm.
and how I need to show a little bit more love to my family and those that matter to me.
Wow.
And it's moments like that
Yeah.
that, yes, maybe my book hasn't sold 1 million copies. Maybe I'm not, on some bestseller list. It's the impact that I'm having, and that's not that I'm having, that my words are having.
Yeah.
That is that's beautiful.
It is beautiful. Absolutely. I want to tell our listeners that they have an opportunity to see you speak at TEDx San Diego on June 11th at the Conrad Previs in La Jolla. Tickets are sold out, but they can still get tickets to see the virtual. And I think everyone listening should. Do you want to talk a little bit about why you decided to get on the TEDx San Diego stage?
So I do love public speaking.
Mm.
And I love being an executive coach. I love it when I see people have these aha moments, when you see people go from a dark place to a place of hope within just within a conversation, right? Or within a talk where people's perspective shifts.
Yeah.
People's perspectives shift. And I forgot who said it once, miracles are a shift in perception. And that's very true for me. So there was a reader who I had lunch with locally, and she just encouraged me. She sent me the link and said, "I've heard your podcasts. I've heard you speak. I think you should apply."
Nice.
And
Very cool.
I've always wanted to do a TEDx, but I wanted to do it on, educational equity, racial justice, leadership, philanthropy, and I wanted to utilize this platform to be able to destigmatize talking about sex abuse and sex trafficking, at least from a male perspective. We don't talk about it, and we definitely don't talk about it in communities of color. And I wanted to inspire others to know that they're not alone
Nice.
and that we do go from, for all the other survivor leaders out there, people that have experienced addiction, sex trafficking, sex abuse, that we are amazing human beings. The world can open up. We do go from living in trauma to being triumphant.
Amen.
And I wanted to tell that story to break taboos
Yeah.
and destigmatize something that gets rarely talked about.
Well, I look forward to it. I will be in the audience. There might be some tickets. I could be wrong. Maybe there's a couple tickets left. So if you're hearing this, definitely get yourself to TEDx San Diego on June 11th.
I'm sure someone's trying to double their price on StubHub.
You think there's scalpers for
Yeah, I'm
TEDx
sure.
San Diego?
Yeah, there were actually. There were a few of them that had to get shut down. There were some scalpers out there.
Really?
Yeah, I heard about it, but
Good grief.
This is why we can't have anything nice.
That's right. We actually went to a concert. Chad got to go see They Might Be Giants for $9.
oh wow.
Yeah. My ticket was $55. Chad's was $11 with fees.
Yeah. $4 for the ticket, but the rest was all fees for Ticketmaster.
Apparently
And the resale.
scalpers, bought so many that they just had to blow them out the day before. Anyway,
Oh wow.
that's not going to happen for TEDx. It's not going to be $9.
The day before, I think they're working on a community community viewing for the run through. I'm not sure, but maybe some more information on that will be made available soon.
Yeah, nice. Well, at the very least, the streaming is going to be powerful. It's going to be an awesome day. They've got wonderful speakers, many of which we're having here on the premise, which I'm excited to continue interviewing. And Jesse, you've just been so wonderful. Thank you so much for being here and for telling your story.
Jeniffer, thank you. And Chad, thank you also for having me, for hosting me today. It's beautiful when I have people in my hometown believing in me and wrapping their arms around me as you did, Jeniffer. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. You can learn more about Jesse Leon on his website, jesseleonauthor.com. You can also follow Jesse on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter at Jesse Leon Author. This has been another episode of The Premise. Please follow The Premise on Twitter at PodPremise. Actually, you know what? Forget Twitter. Don't follow us on Twitter. I think
you're done with that crap.
We're done with Twitter. I'm very mad at Twitter. But do subscribe and rate us everywhere you get podcasts. We're there. It helps spread the word. Tell people about this interview with Jesse Leon. People, we really appreciate you and you listening. And you can visit us online at thepremisepod.com. Again, rate us and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, thank you for listening. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.